everyone, and welcome to Raw with Rasha. Joining me is Raghu Appasani, a psychiatrist and the CEO of the Minds Foundation. Hi, Raghu. How are you doing?
Hey, Rasha, good morning. It's awesome to be on. Thanks for reaching out and having me.
Oh my gosh, this is such an important topic. And I think you and I, both being South Asian Americans, we know that destigmatizing mental health and all the thoughts around it is just such an important conversation. I have so much to talk to you about, so I'm just going to dig straight into everything. With Asian Americans as a whole, that they're three times less likely to even go and ask for help or get any type of therapy. Now, when we dig deeper with even the South Asian Americans, I'm just seeing that one of the biggest things hitting us is the fact that about judgment and a
Mm.
sign of weakness, that when we ask for help or feel that we are going through some type of a mental health issue, that it is representing that we have failed in some way. So I want to ask you, first of all, how do we start moving past that?
Yeah, that's a really good point you bring up. The judgment and weakness is definitely, those are two, very strong contributors to it. I think one thing that we can't forget about too is that, especially within the South Asian community, there's a lot of shame. And it's actually compounded shame, right? And um, in essence, it's a trauma. And we typically in the West, we think of trauma as something that's overt, physical, or something action, verbal, sexual trauma. But in the South Asian community, there's a lot of this subtle trauma that gets compounded over time. And it can actually have similar physiological, mental, spiritual effects on us. And so that's something that we should make sure we acknowledge too, right? Is that we think of mental health, it affects people differently. And that typically what we read about is more the Western philosophy of mental health, but we have to remember how it's portrayed in different cultures.
The subtle trauma, before you carry on, could you just give two or three examples of subtle trauma or what that entails?
Yeah, sure. So, I think part of it specifically for South Asians is that, we kind of many of us get a script handed to us of what we're expected to do, what we're expected to become, what we're expected to achieve. And though it might not seem intense at the time, it can kind of compound over time. And you can start to have these feelings of like you're not enough, or you reach a point where you did the career or whatever is that you were told, but then you're found without meaning or without happiness because you don't have meaning in what you do. And so it's almost like this huge identity crisis then later in life that you reach. And so that once you engage in therapy and once you engage in more of the inner work and realizing how it's affecting you, you start to realize that in essence, it was this trauma that was built up over time. And that's one of the main reasons I started Minds Foundation, almost 10 years ago was how do we change the narrative in mental health? And for me, I grew up with this concept that the best way to make a change is to empower people with the knowledge and with the education. And so that's why Minds was founded with this idea that, well, if we educate people about what mental health is, then they'll understand it, they'll be able to relate to it, and they'll be able to connect to it as a community and as one unified humanity. And once we are able to create good mental health education and create a society that understands it, then we start to fight away the stigma, right? And so what I encourage people to do is actually start talking about it, right? Have the conversations about it. Like you and I are having a conversation. The more that this happens and the more that we start sharing, we start to overcome it. The last piece of this that's really strong is that mental health is something that it makes people feel alone, right? One of the symptoms or signs of it is that people sort of withdraw. They feel alone. They feel like they're stuck in the dark, right? And that they're in this journey by themselves and they don't see the light on the other side. And so by actually sharing your story, you allow people who are in those states of mind to connect to you and to realize that, oh my gosh, like I'm not alone in these feelings. I'm not alone in this journey. Other people are feeling it and you can connect. And so creating that sense of community and using the power of storytelling to do that is really how we create change. And we need more people from the South Asian communities to speak up, right? In India, it's happening, but here it's almost like we're a little bit behind.
Isn't that interesting too that we live in America and as a South Asian community, we are still a little slow to adapt to that, but they're in India, they're already moving forward. I want to bring up something because you mentioned that we should share our stories and the storytelling part. Um, I feel though that what happens with that is that you have to have empathy and we have to have understanding. As loving as a culture we are, and the spirituality and the rich diversity of the Indian culture, I do feel, and this is just me guys, I'm just being blunt and sharing, I feel though sometimes it's hard to share your story because of the empathy and the judgment. Number one, people are judging traumas at a different level. Even though all of our traumas are valid and important, somebody may not look at your trauma as important. I will give my own example real quick. You know, when I went through a divorce, and I'm sorry I'm calling out people here, but I have to say that my South Asian friends were the last people I could talk to about it. And I just did not feel the support that I needed was available from them. And I can't blame them, but I just don't understand. Was it because they didn't know how to relate, or was there a lack of empathy? So I guess my question to you is that I almost feel like, how do we create that empathy? Because if you're going to share your story, you also want to feel like it's a safe space, and people are not feeling necessarily safe in our community to share their story.
Yeah, you're right. And it's sort of this concept of like, what will people say, right? There's a lot of pride, right, in the South Asian community. And we really need to break that because at the end of the day, we do have a surface level empathy and compassion. And even just thinking more broadly, like the solution to the mental health crisis and pandemic is really creating communities that are empathetic and compassionate, right? It's not about making more technology or anything. It's about like really getting down to this root cause of how do you create empathy and compassion, and create communities that really foster that. And at the end of the day, within the Indian community, and I think from my own experience and my loved ones' experiences and friends, the Indian mother is sort of the symbol of empathy and compassion in the family, right? And
Yes.
so, regardless of what happens, regardless of if the father has kicked you out of the house or whatever has happened, drastically in these Bollywood movies, the mom is there and will always be there. And so, no matter what we say or do, like they'll come back around to it, right? And I'm generalizing, but I think that this is one of the benefits of the Indian community is that, yeah, we all know each other's business and work, but in a way that actually protects us all and supports us all. And we see this in the work that we do in more of the rural communities in India is that once people recognize that, oh, mental health is an issue and it can have treatment and it can have ways of dealing with it, they start to really rally up behind those in their community that are suffering and heal and help them heal. And so the South Asian community almost has a collective trauma against mental health, right? And we've dealt with that for decades, and hundreds of years. But if we think back to the Indian culture and the Vedas and the Upanishads and the Gita, the way that mental health in the mind is portrayed is through community and it's through supporting one another. And actually, they're scripts that are written with the essence of empathy and compassion. And so that's the stuff that we've lost for some reason. And so if we can go back to that, it's really in our DNA and it's built into it. DNA. So let's actually start sharing our stories if you're ready to share your story. And will there be negative feedback? Yeah, probably initially, but people will realize that they actually connect to you and that they have suppressed similar emotions that they've had for years. And when they do that and they come back to you in a few months or a few years and want to connect, that's where you start to see the change happen. And so it's really hard for us to share our stories. And it's, I speak up a lot about mental health. You've seen some of my other stuff recently where I'm opening up a lot more. You know, who knows what all these aunties and uncles are saying about me now? But I don't care because maybe it gives them an outlet. Actually, we are a community. We are in a group and a culture that emphasizes so much and of about healing and about education and about meditation. It's like these are these are elements that built what India is, right? And what South Asia is as a culture. And the fact that we've lost so much of that
Absolutely.
is is the concern. And now we can come back to it by having these conversations.
Have that opportunity. Raghu, for people who maybe don't even realize that they're falling into depression, and I think right now it's so important too, especially with what we're
Mm.
dealing with in the world. Can you just mention 2 or 3 symptoms that we should be looking out for? Because sometimes, again, it gets into that thing of, oh, you're not depressed, it's just in your head.
Yeah, sure. I think that there's a lot of different things to look at, and I would encourage people to seek the help first, right? If they're feeling any of these, but um, just some very basic stuff. So change in sort of your functioning, like is it becoming harder for you to actually get yourself motivated or to concentrate on getting things done that normally you'd be able to do? Sleep is probably one of the biggest factors right now for many people. A change in sleep, whether it's you're sleeping more or you're sleeping less or waking up in the middle of the night. And I think for men specifically, and also for women, irritability and anger can be a very significant symptom of depression. And it's often why a lot of males actually don't get diagnosed or don't seek the help, is because it doesn't typically present as sort of an isolated, sad, depressive mood. It more so can present as irritability and anger, which leads to a lot of other issues like increased domestic violence in South Asian cultures and so forth.
What advice, Raghu, would you have for parents, like our parents, their generation, and then even the parents, the people that are our age raising kids now, when it comes to mental health and just having that openness? And look, I'm not looking to change anybody. I cannot do that, because we also have to understand that our parents came here to this country as immigrants. They went through so much. They went through their own struggles and what they had to deal with. But I'm just trying to create a dialogue to help maybe have a conversation where that there could be some open mindedness to it.
Hmm. Yeah, our parents did come as immigrants, right? They dealt through their own suffering, and they have now put us in a position where we can achieve more and we can have these conversations. And so it's also an opportunity for us to help them heal and process things that they've been through. Um, so what I would encourage is the simplicity of just listening without judgment, right? It's easier said than done. Um, there's one of my favorite Krishnamurti quotes, right? Is the ability to observe without judgment or without evaluating is the highest form of intelligence. And if we can encourage that generation to just say, listen, I just need some space to talk, and I need you to just listen, regardless if they understand what you're going through or not, they can listen and let it soak in. And so just do that. Simply just listen. Don't give advice, right? Indians love giving advice. And so these conversations are going to be really challenging initially, but you're going to end up building a deeper relationship with that person. And just to talk about myself personally a little bit, my mother was visiting me this past year, and we were having dinner, and obviously, they're asking about, okay, you're here now. We're so proud you're living on your own. You're a doctor, all this stuff. And then you know what the next question is, right? Is like, are you dating? And I said I'm actually going to therapy and I'm working on some stuff and all this. And she's like, oh my God, what do you mean, right? And the impression from South Asian parents is like, what did we do that you have to do this, right?
What's wrong
And
with
that's not what it. Yeah.
where did we go wrong?
And that's not what it is, right? It's a personal development, it's a journey, and we can always kind of work on our inner work and mind. And so it got a little bit heated, and I kind of disengaged because it's what I do when I'm uncomfortable. And so when we got back, it was a little bit distant. And then I confronted it, and I basically said, let's have a conversation and talk about it. And so regardless of whether I think I underestimated my mother in some ways, of like, she's not going to understand any of this, right? And we had this very multiple hours, like into the night, emotions, crying, joy, anger, all of it, frustration. And at the end of it, the best thing that she said to me was like, you know, I'm glad you're doing what you need to do for yourself. And though I might not be able to understand all of it, I'm always here to listen to you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And you can always reach out to me as a friend and as a mother. And so
How amazing.
that's one of the most powerful things I got.
Raghu, oh my God, that just touches my heart as you're saying that. Like, what an amazing thing for her to say.
It is. And it wasn't easy to get there, right? You have to go through all these emotions. But um,
And plus, you have
I,
psychology back. I mean, as a psychiatrist, you know how to navigate this. Can you imagine the rest of us who don't have your background and we're trying to figure out how to have these conversations?
well, I know how to navigate it for other people. It becomes harder to navigate it for yourself.
Piece of advice. And for anybody who's watching this, I know it's difficult as a South Asian American when you're trying to kind of balance yourself between two cultures. But I think we've come to that place where you don't have to feel shame or weak for seeking help, or for choosing a different career path or not living up to those 110% expectations that your parents had because they were trying to live through you and do things that they weren't able to do. It's a cycle that we're going to need to learn to break, so that we can really authentically live who we were meant to be.
Mhm.
Right.
Exactly. And the question that it all comes back to, and when people hit this identity crisis of like, I've done this, this, and this, and this, why am I not feeling happy? Right. And it's not about happiness, it's about finding meaning, and the happiness will come, right? As Viktor Frankl kind of explains with his logotherapy model. And we're actually faced with this thing of like, who are we really at the end of the day? When you take away the scripts and you take away the external factors, you take away the judgment from that auntie and uncle and from your parents, who are we really? And that's a state that a lot of us hit at some point, and it's really challenging. It's really difficult. And so if we're able to start having these conversations earlier, we can start to discover that and what makes us us without all these external factors.
Absolutely. As we say, those are labels that are put. And I'm so glad you mentioned that because I mean, I can even share that I've gone through that. And it is just so tiring and so challenging to constantly be worrying about what mom and dad think, what auntie and uncle, because I'm sorry, at the end of the day, that doesn't matter. And they're not living your life. While they may care and have the best intention for you, we all have our own journeys. Raghu, tell me a little bit about Minds Foundation.
Sure. So Minds Foundation, it's a nonprofit that I started back in August of 2010. So almost 10 years now. And we began our work in India with the idea of how do we essentially create a society that's empathetic and compassionate, where anyone, regardless of where they are on the mental health spectrum, can get the help that they need. And so we focus on delivering very targeted mental health education programming. We've reached about 300,000 people already in India, and we train community health workers and teachers and provide school mental health education as well. So we trained about 10,000 teachers, reached about 60,000 school children so far. So it's a really, by delivering education, you can hit a lot of people with a very small budget. Okay, so it's a very powerful tool, educating people and empowering them with it. Um, and from working in India, we've now expanded to Los Angeles as well, where we're doing very intimate events that bring together the concept of storytelling and mental health education. And so in Los Angeles, we're now going to launch a program where in each neighborhood we'll have an ambassador who knows the local mental health resources, and there'll be sort of a point person to do events to build community, but also a guide for when someone might need help. It's
Raghu, before we head out, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I think the last thing that I just want to share is that the mental health spectrum is large and it affects everybody, and it doesn't matter where you are, right? If you're in India in a village or in Bombay, or you're in Los Angeles or Boston or London, if you're rich or poor, it does not matter. And so it doesn't matter if you're white or black or South Asian. Like, we are all affected by mental health. And so once that soaks in and people understand it, we can start to have the conversations, because at the end of the day, we have to realize that we're not alone, right? And this is a unified consciousness and a unified humanity. And so whatever we contribute to it is going to benefit the whole. And so I just encourage people to, if you want to say something, just speak up, and you know, someone will be there to listen, whether it's me or you or whoever it is. And though there might be feedback and negative feedback initially, it will soak in with people, and we're all dealing with our own mental health journey. And so just understand you're not alone. That's the most important factor.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I think that's so important. And listen, there will always be backlash or negative feedback. And I think that that's just something we have to move past. And that's why I'm saying it is so important to change the narrative. And we have the power, guys, at this time to start doing that. So if you realize that, there needs to be a change that needs to be made, I encourage you guys, check out the Minds Foundation. I'll have the website there below, and just open up your heart more, be empathetic, and truly listen, because there are people out there that are suffering that are not having these conversations. Raghu, thank you so much for joining me. I'm so happy
Thanks, Rasha.
for this conversation. I think that these conversations must continue, especially in the South Asian American community, in order for us to help open up that healing for everybody.
Yes, totally agree. And I think, both of us, I'll speak for you as well. We're both here to help people engage in those conversations.
Oh, are you volunteering me?
I am.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us and for being here on Raw with Rasha.